Hello and welcome to another episode of Tell Muses. This is a podcast by storytellers, with storytellers, for storytellers, and for anyone interested in the art of the oral word. And today we have with us, all the way from the northern part of Europe, from cold Sweden, a very warm-hearted girl who's called Karin Lundengård. Welcome, Karin.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
It's very nice to have you here with us. So is it really cold over there?
It's not too bad right now. It's like -3, but we had -18 the other day.
Ooh. What
Yeah.
about you, Simona? How is it in Italy?
Oh, we had a way of warm weather, so it's like 10 degrees now.
Plus, I
Right.
guess.
Yeah, because it's the northern part of Italy as well, you see.
We're in the season where if you say a number for temperature, it's kind of assumed to be minus.
Yeah, right. No need to put the sign in front, I see. And here on Syros Island, we're expecting bad weather this Monday, which means it's going to be around 12 degrees plus.
Oh,
That's a
poor
plus,
you.
Karin.
Poor you. I was biking home the other day, and when I came home, I had this white mustache.
Crystals.
Yeah, it was just ice crystals.
I remember once you were broadcasting live. I don't remember. It must have been some Zoom of some sort, and you were showing us the crystals on your eyelashes.
Oh, yeah.
Karin, truth is, I do know you pretty well, but it's been a while since we last talked, and I know there will be people listening who don't know who Karin Lundengård is. Would you like to tell us about it?
Ooh, who I am. Well,
Yeah.
I'm a storyteller, and I am also a researcher. So I have a PhD in computational modeling of biological systems, which means I make computer models of living things. And I like to tell stories that explain things, whether that explanation be the scientific one or the mythological one, because I think that they're both important. They just explain different parts of our world. And I live in Sweden.
Karin, how did you get interested in stories and storytelling? How did your passion start?
I can't remember a time when I haven't been interested in stories. My mother told me stories from a very young age, and I wanted her to tell me stories, like rather than read stories. She has told me, I have no memory of this because I was really young, but she has told me that was the case. And I can remember when I was younger, when I was like 10 to 13 or something, I started using stories as a model of analysis for the world. That when I was in a social situation or something happened and I thought about it, and then I told it to myself as a story in several versions to try to figure out what else could have happened. I was reading a lot of fantasy, these series of books where there is 700 pages to a book and there's 37 books in one series and it never ends. And I was also telling stories to my best friend who was very patient in listening to all of these stories, both stories I'd learned and stories I'd made up myself. And then I started university. And at university, there's a lot of reading. There is huge amount of reading. And at some point, my brain just refused to handle text anymore. The written word didn't mean anything when I looked at it. And I was like, this should contain information, but I can't decode it. But how am I going to get my fix of stories, of fantasy, of, imagination if I can't read? So then I started a storytelling group for oral storytelling at my university. So we were a bunch of students who got together and had tea and lit candles and were just telling any stories to each other. You could tell anything. I ran that group for 10 years, I think. And then COVID came along and you couldn't meet anymore. Lots of storytelling groups started moving out online and suddenly they were, searchable. So I could find them and I could figure out like, oh, there are other people in the world doing this. And I also realized that you could take courses. So I took a couple of courses in storytelling, some in Swedish and one in English for a storyteller called Shona Lee, who's from the UK. And she was part of something called the Step Up Commission. They were looking for a new show for a storytelling festival. If you had an idea, new ideas in storytelling performance, you could apply to this commission, which I did, and then I won. So I was the one who got the commission. And in that, it was included, like you had 3 storytellers as teachers for almost a year. And that ended up in a show called When the Water Turns Blue, which is about information preservation and storytelling and nuclear waste. It premiered and toured in Great Britain, and that's pretty much how I got into storytelling on stage, which is quite a different thing from storytelling in a group with tea and lit candles. And yeah, and then it's now pretty much.
Okay, concerning the When the Water Turns Blue, I have attended that show at Gawi. By the way, this season 2 of our podcast, we always remember at some point, Simona, that's good for us, is under the wing of Get a Word in Edgeways Festival. So they have adopted us, and Get a Word in Edgeways, aka Gawi, is a lovely little festival which takes place every October in the picturesque town of Matchwenlock, next to Wales on the English side. So people should go there because that's where I saw Karin's show. And from what I can recall, dear Karin, I do admire your effort to warn humanity not to vanish because of our own stupidity. But I also remember a little story from backstage when you told us how you came up with that show's name. Would you like to tell us about that?
Part of the show, I should say, is that I was working with a group in Linköping in Sweden who got a task from the government. In Sweden, we are building a storage space for nuclear waste. And the waste is radioactive for something like 10,000 to 150,000 years. So somehow you should warn people not to touch that. And 10,000 years, that's longer than writing has existed as a concept. But storytelling has existed much longer than that. So I was working with this group in Linköping who was tasked with making this warning to put on the nuclear storage. And that's how I came into doing the nuclear storage or nuclear fairy tale that's part of the show. And I was reading up a lot about radiation and what kind of damage it can do and how nuclear radiation works. And one of the things that radiation does, and that you can see if you are inside of a nuclear power plant, there is the reactor, and on top of the reactor, there's a pool of water that protects against the radiation from the reactor. When the reactor goes through this water, it emits a blue light, which is beautiful. I mean, it's a shade of blue that is rare to find anywhere else, and it's called Cherenkov radiation. When I was doing my PhD, we were sitting in the coffee room one day, watching the news, and there had been an earthquake, a really big earthquake, close to Japan. And there was a huge tsunami that had just swept over Japan, and one of the facilities that had gotten drenched and like broken by this tsunami was a nuclear power plant called Fukushima. And because everything was, submerged in water and nothing really worked anymore in that power plant, they couldn't read the instruments on what was happening inside of the reactor. So everybody was sitting there watching the news, because this was on the world news, right? That there is a power plant in Japan, and it's a high risk that it's going to have a nuclear meltdown. And if it does, you might have, like along the lines of Chernobyl. That's a huge accident. And we're sitting there watching, and everybody is just really upset about this. And our technician comes strolling into the coffee room, and she just throws one glance at the news on the television, and she goes, "Ah, they don't really need to worry until the water turns blue." And then the next morning, like the first news I saw was that, yeah, there's been flashes of blue in the water at the Fukushima reactor. So that's the first sign they had, because I think that 4 out of 6 reactors actually had meltdowns. And that was the first real tangible sign that this has happened, because no instruments were working and they didn't have any power and everything was just, waterlogged, and nobody could really go in there safely. So that's where the name come from, when the water turns blue. And we were sitting brainstorming for the name of this show, me and 2 of my storytelling teachers who helped me build it. I came up with all of these names that were referring to old myths about warnings, or, I was talking about the Jörmungandr, the Midgard serpent that's on the bottom of the sea. In the Norse myth about Jörmungandr, Odin sees Jörmungandr, thinks, "Oh, snake, disgusting," and he throws it out into the sea because he wants to get rid of it, because he doesn't like it. And then it's just lying at the bottom of the sea and eating whales and giant octopus, I guess, or giant squid. And it grows and grows and grows until it goes all the way around the world. And at Ragnarök, which is the last battle of the gods, Jörmungandr will come up on land, open his mouth, and spew poison that poisons the earth and the water and everything. Which was also, I think, a pretty good image for what happens if you just put something away and pretend it doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
And I was doing all of these like more and more and more complicated references. And then at the end I said, or maybe just when the water turns blue. And one of my teachers were like, "I don't know where that comes from, but that's the name of the show."
Excellent. Yeah, well, Odin didn't do much of a good job there, did he? He just swapped it underneath the carpet, and that was
Yep.
it.
Like, throw it into the sea, pretend it doesn't exist anymore. Not a problem.
Well, you're a romantic soul, Karin. I know you're a better person than I am. You're trying to save humanity. Whereas I'm a total cynical. Simona, I think that one way or another, we will find a way to go and get our hands on that waste. We
Oh,
will
for
have
sure.
forgotten everything. We will still hear the stories and not believe them. This is what we do, especially when they tell us not to do something. That's just human
Absolutely.
nature. Yes.
Absolutely. I was telling a story in my storytelling group the other day, because there is a legend from my hometown, or my home village. It's a very tiny village. There was this really evil lord who was living in a castle. And then, as punishment for his evil deeds, the earth broke open and his whole castle just went down into this gaping hole, and the moor just closed over it. And now there's only grass and nobody lives there, because if you try to build a house there, it's going to burn down, or you're going to die from disease, or you're going to get no money left, And then if you try to dig there, you hear the voice of this evil lord who says, "If you try to come in, I will come out." So nobody
Ooh.
goes digging there. And my entire storytelling group was like, "Where is it? We need to go there. We need to dig." So yeah, I totally believe you. Yeah, for sure.
And Karin, how do you put storytelling and science together? Can you tell us something, for example, about your show? So how you merge the storytelling and nuclear waste, which is something very strange to put together. And how do you do it also outside of the show?
Yeah. So when I did my PhD, I was doing research on the brain. And one of the things that I realized about the brain is that when we get information and the brain tries to figure out if this information is important or not, it does it through emotion. It doesn't really matter how important this information is, like objectively, because we are not rational creatures, but it matters what kind of emotion is tied to this information. So I started thinking about the way we present science. When I was taught how to present science during my education and PhD, They always pressed that it was very important that we were objective when we presented it. And I don't agree with that, because there are parts of the scientific process when there is extremely important that we are objective. That's why we invented statistics. That's why we're doing like the data collection in a very objective and structured way, and double blinds and all of those things. And that's why we have reviews from someone who's not in the experiment to check all of that. And that's important. That's where it's important to be objective about the things that you're investigating. But when you are presenting it to humans, when you're presenting your results to humans and you are certain of your own results, which is the point of the scientific process, right? Then you need to attach them to emotion, because otherwise people who are listening won't think that it's important. The thing about storytelling, there's a reason why it has existed for so many millennia, right? Because a story is information pre-packed with emotion. Like the format is already, you've already attached an emotion to the information. So in a way, I think that our brains are hardwired to receive information that way. It's really kind of the optimal way of communicating. The things that you want people to remember, the things you want people to feel are important. And that's why I started experimenting with information and science and storytelling. And the sort of extreme sport in that would be the research field that's called deep memory, which is about information storage over a very long time. And their minimum time, like a short time in deep memory information storage, is 10,000 years. That's the shortest, which is, as I said, longer than writing has existed. But not longer than storytelling, because I know one story from Tasmania in Australia that tells about things that happened 12,000 years ago.
Wow.
And if you look at this story and look at what's happening in this story, there are actually one astronomical and one geological event that can be measured scientifically and independently of each other. So you have two data points that can date this story 12,000 years back.
And I think you have now paved the way for a story to come. What do you think? Story.
Well, maybe I'll tell you another story from my home village in that case. It's not that old. It's only 500 years or so. I grew up in Skåne, which is the southernmost part of Sweden. And at this time point, when the story is happening, it was Danish. It wasn't Swedish, it was Danish. But the Swedes didn't like that it was Danish, and they wanted to change that. So the Swedish king gathered an army in Stockholm, and he started marching south. And close to where I grew up, there is a mansion. It's like, this big house with lots of land surrounding it. And you have a family who owns all of this land. 500 years ago, this mansion existed already. And the son of the lord who had this mansion was named Arild. Arild grew up happy in this big house and on the land. And when he was late teenager, they heard about the Swedes coming to take over. Like the Swedish army is coming, there's going to be a war. And Arild, he was pretty big lad. Like he was tall and he was broad-shouldered and he was strong. But he was not interested in fighting at all. He was also, I think, kind of a romantic soul. In fact, he was quite in love with a woman who was living there. She was the daughter of the richest merchant in the area, and her name was Tale. And she was also quite big, like tall. She was a striking woman rather than beautiful. And Arild, he admired her a lot. There was one midsummer when they was going to have this midsummer feast. That's a very important holiday in Sweden. They were going to have this midsummer feast, and the whole village had come together to have the feast. They had long tables set up, and Tale was helping setting out the dinner. And she came out, and she had one barrel of beer under each arm, and on top of the beer barrels, there were like bread, and on top of the bread, there were platters with meat. And she just carried that over to the table, and she put it on the table, one barrel and then the other barrel. And Arild was like, wow, that woman, why? So, of course, I mean, he wanted to impress her as well. He had the habit of, he had little gift. When he was out riding, he sort of took the detour around where Tale was living to give her little things, like a flower or some sweets or something. When he came to her house, there was this arch that you had to ride through. There was a wall around the house, and there was this arch, like a big gate that you had to ride through. And at the top of the gate, there were iron hooks for if you need to hoist something. And he used to stop in the middle of this arch, and then he'd reach up and he'd grab those hooks, and then he'd lift himself and the horse. And Tale looked at that and was like, wow, this man. I mean, he's the one, he's the guy, and they understood each other. But right in the middle of this budding romance that they're having, the Swedes arrive, the Swedish army, and the Swedish army just burns everything, and they kill a huge percent of the population at that point in the war. So of course, I mean, Arild, he's a big, strapping young man, he has to go to war. And he gets called into the army, and the first battle that he's in, he gets taken prisoner by the Swedish king. So for him, the war was pretty short. He was taken prisoner, and then he was taken with a lot of other prisoners up to Stockholm. It's quite a way from Skåne to Stockholm, and especially if you're walking, and especially if you're walking on 16th century roads, and especially if you don't even want to go there. The guards who are trying to get, train the prisoners moving, get them up to Stockholm, I think they had a very annoying and boring job. And they were not always kind to the prisoners. But Arild, he was a very charming young man, and he used this to his advantage. He started talking to the guards and sort of making friends with them a little bit. And he started telling them stories from when he grew up, stories that he knew, and entertaining them. And somewhere during this travel up to Stockholm, someone mentions to the king that there is this guy, he's actually hilarious. He's like really funny. And if you're having an evening that's boring, maybe you should talk to him. I know he's Danish, but for a Dane, he's actually pretty okay. So the king sends for Arild to come to his tent and tell him some stories. And Arild goes there and he entertains the king. And this became a regular occurrence. So all the way up to Stockholm, Arild goes into the tent of the king in the evening, and they have conversations, and Arild tells stories. And when they get to Stockholm, the king has other duties. So Arild is taken to the prison, and he is put into a cell. And the king forgets about him. He was entertaining it during a trip, but now other things are happening. So Arild, he's sitting there in his cell, and he's just waiting for a prison exchange between the Swedish and the Danes, but nothing is happening. And the days pass, and the weeks pass, and months pass. And Arild thinks, okay, no one is coming to get me. I guess I have to do something myself if I want to get out of here. So Arild, he manages to convince one of the guards to send a letter to the Swedish king, asking for an audience, saying, I don't know if you remember me, but we had long talks during the trip up to Stockholm, and I have something I need to tell you. And the king responds and allows Arild to come and talk to him again. And Arild comes in front of the king, and he starts talking about Tale. Tale, who Arild thinks is the most beautiful woman in the world. And she is amazing, and she is so strong, and she is taking care of everything now that Arild is gone. And Arild is like really worried about that. And he's also really worried that there is so much work with planting all the things that they need to plant, because otherwise they're not going to have a harvest next year. And if they don't have a harvest, everybody's going to starve, including Tale, which would be awful, wouldn't it? She's such an amazing person. And I don't know, the king, he was like, oh no, we have to save Tale. But also, you are my prisoner. You can't just leave when you're a prisoner. And Ariel goes, Your Majesty, I promise that if you let me go down to Skåne to plant, I will come back when we have harvested that which I've planted. And I will be your prisoner for as long as needed. I swear. And the king goes like, yeah, that seems fair. So he lets Ariel go down to Skåne. And Ariel, he rides the whole way down there. And when he gets to this mansion, to Ugerup farm, he throws the doors open and he yells, I'm home, everyone! And nobody answers. The whole mansion is just empty. And at first he thinks, oh no, the Swedes has killed everyone. There's a war on, everyone is gone. But then he realizes that no, it's Sunday. They're probably at church. So he turns around and he runs down to the church in the village. And then he throws the gate open again. And he's about to yell, I'm home, everyone! When he sees that not only is everybody in the church and they're sitting in the benches, his family is there and all the neighbors, all the villagers, Tale is there. But she's not sitting in a bench. She's standing at the altar with another man. And Ariel, he just like stops and goes, Tale, what are you doing? And she turns around, and when she sees him, she just throws the flowers and kicks off her shoes, and she runs all the way down to the gate, and she jumps up and hugs Arild. So it's a good thing he's a very tall and strong man. And he catches her, and she yells, I thought you were dead. Everybody said you died. And he said, no, I'm not dead. What are you doing, trying to marry someone else? You can't do that. And she says, no, I'm not going to marry anybody else. Now that I know that you're alive, you are the only man that I want. And then her father comes up, walking through the church, and he goes, Arild, we're so happy that you are back and that you haven't been killed by the evil Swedes. But Tale is actually promised to this other man. They are engaged and they're going to marry today. But Tale just turned around and looked at her father, and went, no, I will marry Arild or nobody. And her father recognized that look. And he realized that it was Arild or nobody. And I mean, the priest was already there, and the church was decorated, and they'd already cooked all the food for a wedding. So they just switched the grooms. And Arild and Tale got married. And they celebrated, and they lived very happily. The day after the wedding, once they'd woken up in the morning, kind of late, but once they'd woken up, Arild went out to plant seeds, as he had promised the Swedish king. And he went planting, and apparently on the wedding night, he also planted a seed in Tale, because she started growing, and things out in the fields started growing. And once autumn came, all of the farmers, they harvested their grain and their apples and all of the other things that they'd grown during the summer. And then the first snow started falling. Winter came along, and with winter came a letter from the Swedish king saying, Arild, you made me a promise. You promised that once you had harvested, you would come back to Stockholm and be my prisoner. And harvest time has come and gone, and I haven't seen neither hide nor hair of you. up in Stockholm. Did you lie to a king? And Arild, he put pen to paper and he wrote his own letter to send back to the Swedish king that said, Your Majesty, I have never lied to you. I promised that when that which I had planted had grown and been harvested, I would come back to you and be your prisoner. Well, let me tell you, I planted pine trees. And none of them has even come up with any pines over the ground this year. Maybe I'll see something of them next year. And once we've cut them down, I will for sure come up and be your prisoner in 30 years or so. Yours truly, Arild of Denmark. And Arild never went to the Swedish king because not long after that, the king died. But the pine trees that Arild planted, they kept growing. And the family that Arild and Thale started, they kept growing as well. And they lived for many generations at Ugerup farm. And I've been there, and I have walked in that forest. And those pine trees still stand, tall and straight and true. The end.
What a wonderful story, Karin.
I felt bad about that guy who was left at the altar, you know. I hope he, I don't know, obliged to take her for a wife and he was relieved by
Maybe.
hero's arrival. Let us hope.
Maybe he found another woman who was lovely, absolutely lovely, and loved him, you know?
Karin, well, it's the first time that we meet. It's the first time that I hear you tell a story. And for our whole conversation, I noticed that you are one of the most smiley people that I've ever met. And this story just resonates with seeing you tell a story with your smile on your face. And the kind of story that you told us is like a Karin story. Can I say? It's brilliant to see how the stories that you tell reflect your personality as well. So
Thank you.
it was brilliant. Thank you so much for that story. So you told us about Norse mythology. Now you told us a story about your homeland. So are these the kinds of stories that you like telling? Do you like telling other kinds of stories?
Oh, I like telling lots of different kinds of stories. I like telling mostly like myths and folk tales. So it was pretty late in life that I started telling personal stories. That's kind of after COVID thing. And now I enjoy telling them too, but I didn't tell them as stories for a very long time. It was very much folk tales and myths from any part of the world. And now I'm a bit more conscious. I think a lot about cultural appropriation. I don't always come to a conclusion, but I think about it. And that's a very delicate subject, right? But I love telling stories from all over the world and finding the stories that, like, both the similarities. There are stories that seem to pop up wherever you go in the world. And that, I think, must be because there are some things that are just hardwired into us as humans. Like, that's the essential human that you can identify that through those stories. And then there are stories that are widely different between different cultures and things that only happen in a specific culture in a specific context. And they're also very interesting because they say something about the uniqueness of different groups and different people. I've always loved stories that explain things. I think I'm a researcher or a scientist at heart in that aspect.
When it comes to cultural appropriation that you mentioned, I know it's a huge thing, especially for peoples or tribes that have been have been taken advantage of, etc. But I think it is most important that we try to tell their tales with respect, because then you change it into cultural appreciation. And that's a term I'd like our storytellers to use as much as possible. You need to research, of course. You cannot just go out and tell whatever story. When I was in Graham Langley's house, a little bit outside Birmingham, he had this room full of books, which included some books he had for giving away, which was a huge torture for me because I had to pick among them which ones I could put in my suitcase without paying the extra weight at the airport.
Oh, yeah.
And among those books were some books of the Aboriginal people of Australia, where he had spent some years. So I looked them up and I started reading a few of the myths. And even though I really, really liked them, I would never pick those to tell because I don't know, I don't have enough information about the people who invented the myths. It's not like anybody can tell any story. You need to feel it resonate within you somehow.
And especially with the Aboriginal myths, because I've been looking into that a little bit as well, because of this story, that 12,000-year-old story, that's from Tasmania in Australia, so that's Aboriginal mythology. And I found a few different sources for it, but there is a book that's written by Aboriginal tellers where this myth is also written down. And they say that even though we are telling you this story is not yours to tell. So they explicitly say, don't tell these stories because they are sacred and should only be told in certain settings and by certain people. And as far as I understand, there are at least some people in Australia where the way that you show which territory is yours. In my culture, we would have a map and then you'd have a drawing, like this is the edge of the land that you own. And then there is a document that's signed and there's money changing hands. And that's how you show that this land is mine. But the way that they show it is that the one who can sing the land owns it. So the one who can tell the stories of the land, that's who belongs to the land and the land belongs to them. And therefore, telling those stories, if you are not the one who owns the land, is an act of colonialism. Like you're essentially stealing their land in a spiritual way. In my legal system, that's not a thing. That doesn't even exist. And I don't know how to handle that because I have nothing in my culture that tells me how to do that. But in their culture, that's essentially a law. When I'm looking at this, because I think that this 12,000-year-old story is so fascinating, especially with the intersection of we can actually measure when this happened. But can I tell the story? Technically not. And where is the line of telling the story and telling about the story? Like, can I talk about the scientific part of this without telling the story? But I know that if I tried to tell the story, I could never tell it in the traditional way because I am not Palawan. Palawa people are the ones who are telling the story. I don't have their traditions. I don't have their culture. I only have the version of the story that I've read in the book. I don't have the language.
I think it's always wise to ask for permission.
Yeah, I also don't have any contact with any Palawans.
So what do you do nowadays storytelling wise, Karin?
Nowadays, I haven't been very busy storytelling because I've been moving house, and that takes up a lot. But a part of the plan is to make When the Water Turns Blue into a Swedish version, so I can have it in Sweden. And I have like 1,000 ideas for new shows to talk about. I would love to make some companion pieces for When the Water Turns Blue about, for example, the red forest in Chernobyl. When the power plant in Chernobyl exploded, a lot of the radioisotopes fell down onto this forest and it became incredibly radioactive, and it also was a lot of dust from the fire, and that's why it's called the red forest, because the dust turned the whole forest red. And the government was really, really afraid that there was going to be a forest fire in this forest, because then everything would go up into the air again. All the isotopes that had settled in the forest would come up in the air again. So they cut down the forest and they put soil over it, and they grew a new forest and cut that down and put soil over it, and now it's a new forest again. That's like one of the most radioactive sites in the entire world. It's a pretty big area, this exclusion zone around Chernobyl, where you're not allowed to go. But the Russians are there now and digging in the Red Forest because there's a war. Chernobyl is in Ukraine. And the Russians are there and they're digging the ditches for the tanks and stuff, which is not so good. But before the war in Ukraine, the exclusion zone around Chernobyl, which is one of the most radioactive sites in the world, is also one of the most wildlife-rich sites in the world. One question you could ask is, how dangerous is radioactivity compared to the presence of humans? But in another sense, this is so hopeful. I mean, there's such an incredible amount of hope in looking at how the ecosystem comes back. And there is so much interesting data from that forest that has been collected since the 80s up until 2020. And to make a story about that would be really interesting.
And since we're moving towards the end of the interview, Karin, would you have maybe a little story for us to end this with?
A little story. I can give you a little traditional folk tale from Sweden. I'm focusing
yes,
on where
please
I'm
do.
from now.
Awesome.
Once there was a boy, and he was living in a farm, and they had goats. And it was the young boy's job to take the goats into the forest. Because at this time, we didn't have pastures the way that we do now, when you put up a fence and you put the animals inside of the fence and they get to eat. No, you put the fence around the things that you wanted the animals not to eat. And then you put the animals out in the forest. And the young men and women were the ones who were tasked with taking care of the animals. So this young boy, he's out in the forest and he is herding his goats. You know, goats like to climb. So some of the goats, they start climbing up this sort of rocky hill at the start of a mountain. And suddenly the boy hears a voice. Who's knocking on my mountain? Get away from here. And out of a crack in the mountain comes a troll. Huge, big troll. He's as tall as the trees, and he's looking down at the boy. And when he opens his mouth, he has these long yellow fangs, and he says, "Go away, or I will eat you and all of your goats." And the boy looks at the troll and says, "I won't go away. If you try to eat me, I will fight you." And the troll kind of looks down at this boy that doesn't even reach his knees, right? And he says, "Fight me. You will fight me." I don't believe that for a second. "Sure I will," said the boy. "I'll show you how strong I am. Let's have a competition. If I win, my goats get to graze wherever they want in this forest. And if you win, I'll go away." "If I win," said the troll, "you're not going anywhere, because I will eat you." "Fair enough, but you won't eat me, because I will defeat you in a fight, and I'm gonna show you. Let's have a competition of strength. Let's see who can throw a stone the farthest." "All right," said the troll. And they both went to look for a good stone to throw. And the troll, he went to the mountain and he started like lifting all of these heavy, big rocks until he found one that was impressively large. And he brought it back to the boy, who had gone and looked underneath a spruce, because he knew that in the spruce tree there was this little gray bird that built their nests. And he found a bird in a nest lying on eggs, and he caught the bird and he held her in his hands when he walked back to the troll. And the troll showed his big stone, and the boy said, yeah, that's an impressive stone, rather. Let's see how far you can throw it. And the troll, he wound up and he threw his huge stone, and he threw it all the way up on the top of the mountain, where it fell down and it caused a small rock slide to come back down. And the boy nodded and was like, yeah, that was a pretty good throw. I mean, not as good as what I'm going to do. And then he wound his hand back and he tossed the bird up in the air. Just a light toss, not even a big throw. And the bird flew towards her tree. And she flew and flew far up over the mountain and farther away. And she didn't come back down. Not that the troll could see anyway. The troll was kind of reluctantly impressed. I mean, it wasn't a big stone, but it was a very long throw. Said the troll. 2 out of 3. Fair enough, said the boy. Well, since you weren't that good at throwing stones, how good are you at crushing stones? And the troll said, I am very good at crushing stones. I am the best at crushing stones. And then he ran away to go and get a good stone to crush. And the boy, he didn't go anywhere. He just put his hand down into his backpack and he took out a piece of cheese that he'd gotten for his lunch. And then he rolled this piece of cheese around in the dirt so it looked like a stone. And when the troll came back with a stone that he'd found, that he thought was really quite impressive, but he knew he could crush it, he showed his stone to the boy and he said, yeah, watch your eyes. There's gonna be sharp pieces flying everywhere. And then the troll tensed up all of his muscles and he started squeezing the stone and it started cracking and grinding and fell apart into little tiny shards of stone and dust. And the boy nodded and was like, yeah, wow, that was good. I mean, for such a small stone, but good. I mean, nice. Okay, my turn. And then he took the piece of cheese in one hand and he started squeezing. And the cheese had a lot of liquid in it. And the liquid started running down the hand and the arm of the boy and it started dripping down on the ground. And after a while, the boy stopped squeezing and he said, I didn't manage to crush the stone, but at least I got all the water out of it. And the troll had never managed to squeeze water out of a stone. And he thought, this boy, he's much stronger than he looks. Maybe we shouldn't have competitions of strength, really. But I still need to scare him off, away from my mountain. So he said, well, let the third competition be the one that determines who wins. Forget the results of the first 2 ones. They were just warm up. This is the one that matters. We're going to have a competition of eating. And he thought, now that the boy sees how good I am at eating, he will not dare to stay because he knows I will eat him whole and all of his goats. So the troll got his really, really, really big pot out of the mountain and he started making porridge. And he made this huge, huge amount of porridge. And the boy was just sitting there and looking at the porridge. And while the troll was turning around to get more wood for the fire, the boy slipped off his jacket, took his backpack, put it on his stomach, and then put the jacket back on again. And then he sat there looking completely innocent once the troll turned back around. And when the porridge was done, he started eating big bites out of the porridge. And the boy, he also ate as much porridge as he could, but he only ate every 3rd bite. The other 2 he put into the backpack on his stomach. And the boy was putting away an impressive amount of porridge for such a small size. And the troll was eating faster and faster and faster just to win this competition. In the end, he said, "Oh, my stomach is so full, I can't get another bite." And the boy said, "Oh, really? Because I just started." "How do you do it?" said the troll. "How can you eat so much when you are so tiny?" "Well," said the boy, "I'm actually cheating. Because I eat until my stomach is full, and then I just take my knife and I cut it open and empty it, and then I keep eating, and that's how I can eat so much." And he took his knife out and he cut open the backpack, and all of the porridge ran out, and then he shut it again and he kept eating. And the troll said, "Oh, I'm gonna try that." But when he took his knife and started cutting, there wasn't just porridge coming out. There was a lot of blood and a lot of guts, and nobody ever had a problem with that troll in that forest ever again. The end.
Woo! There you have
Wonderful.
some good Swedish gore.
Yeah. What a brilliant story. I love Swedish trolls, so
Yeah, all trolls are good, but Swedish trolls are the best.
I know, right?
Oh, well, girls, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for coming along today and sharing your scientific wisdom and your stories with us, Karin. We do wish you the best. We hope you get to tell lots of stories about how people might escape with their lives in the future and
Mhm.
not be, radio activated to death.
Yes.
yeah, that's a wonderful work that you're doing. So keep doing it, please.
Thank you.
And perhaps, it's just an idea, brainstorming here. Perhaps you should take it to universities. That would be a good idea and might turn it a little bit more functioning, to get to the younger generation.
Yeah, I was actually talking to someone who was doing the teaching in health in the UK. We tried to get the show to a conference that they were having, and it didn't work out in practice, unfortunately. But I definitely want to get it into many more venues. I mean, I like the storytelling venues. I like to have the show as entertainment, but I think that there are more places where it could go and fit really well.
If I
agree.
were you, I'd probably start from my own university and then take it to, one step at a time, take it to other
Mm.
places.
Yeah, I've had it at the Nuclear Information Conference that they
Hmm,
arranged. So yeah,
good. Great. Well, good luck in all your projects. Hope
thank you
I'll
for
see you
inviting me
soon.
to your podcast.
It was a
Thank you so
pleasure.
much for coming. Real pleasure, yes.
Bye
Too.
then.
Bye.
Bye bye. Thank you.